The following file is classified under the Forgotten Code Protocol. Unauthorized access, duplication, or execution of the contained program is strictly prohibited. Designation: FCP-001, Black Terminal. Recovered from the remnants of a bankrupt law firm's server in 2003. This executable has demonstrated the ability to retrieve personal data without network access, and to predict the time, date, and cause of death with perfect accuracy. What you are about to hear is the final testimony of the last known individual to have interacted with it. Daniel Hayes had learned to trust the quiet. It was in the quiet that failing drives confessed. In the quiet, partitions split open and old lives resurfaced, weeding photos, tax filings, love letters that should never have been sent. He had recovered the remnants of decades, piecing together fragments for strangers who looked at him as if he were some kind of necromancer. He worked night in a narrow Chicago apartment, the kind with a stubborn radiator and a window that stared directly into another brick wall. The place smelled faintly of solder and stale coffee. His desk was an organized chaos of cables, screwdrivers, and labeled anti-static bags. He had been doing this long enough to know that no two drives died the same way. But they all told their secrets in the end of "you knew how to listen." The job was repetitive, almost mechanical, but Daniel had a knack for it. His clients came in all shapes: students, grieving parents, clutching laptops as if they were coffins. He kept his head down, took the work, got paid enough to cover rent and bills, and let the rest of the world pass him by. That night, the hard drive on his desk came from a small law firm that had gone under months earlier. The courier who brought it didn't stay long, just dropped the padded envelope, signed the form, and left without a word. The casing was dented. Someone had tried to pry it open with a screwdriver and given up, leaving jagged scratches along the seam. Daniel turned it over in his hands, feeling the cold weight of it before slotting it into his dock. He tacked it with a strip of masking tape, scrawled the intake number, and hit the power. The drive spun up reluctantly, clicking in a way that told him it was living on borrowed time. The directory tree was a graveyard, corrupted, corrupted, corrupted. Whole folders were nothing but digital ash. A handful of surviving directories, and then, buried in a bland utilities folder, one intact file with no metadata at all. Name, black_terminal.exe. Daniel frowned. The name was generic enough, but it didn't belong to any utility he recognized. He sipped from his mug, made a face coffee, gone cold hours ago, undouble-clicked. The CRT monitor blinked to a full black screen. A single line materialized in monospaced white, connecting. He glanced at the modem. No lights. Airplane mode on the laptop he used as a bridge. No background processes. If the program was reaching for the outside world, it was doing it through a wire he couldn't see. He waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The cursor blinked steadily, as if it had all the time in the world. Daniel drummed his fingers on the desk. "Okay," he muttered, to no one. Leftover shell for some dead app. He was about to kill the process when the cursor froze mid-blink. The line vanished, replaced by a flurry of characters, too fast, too track-like, a hand riffling cards. Then everything stilled. A new block of text drew itself with mechanical calm. Name, Daniel Thomas Hayes. Address, 2145 W. Belmont Avenue, Chicago. Ill date of birth, the 6th of November, 1975. Daniel's throat went dry. He hadn't typed his name tonight. The workstation had never seen his home address. The apartment's internet had been cut off 3 weeks ago to save money. He hotspotted only when he had to, and his phone was face down on the couch, dead. He reached for the power button. The screen hiccuped again, as if it had read the thought. A second block of information appeared. Different name, a different address, and one more line in a colder kind of white. Name, Stephen Morris. Address, 4872 N. Claremont Avenue, Chicago. Ill date of birth, February 14th, 1978. Prediction, death, August 15th, 2003. Interstate 90 multi-vehicle collision. Stephen Morris was Daniel's co-worker. They had spoken just an hour ago. He stared at the prediction, telling himself it was a prank. Some leftover debug output from an internal program. But the words didn't feel like code. They felt like truth. Outside, the city hummed faintly. Inside, the only sound was the quiet breathing of the machine, waiting for him to acknowledge what it had said. Daniel closed the terminal window, or thought he did. The black screen remained. The text remained. The cursor kept blinking. And beneath the last prediction, a new prompt appeared. Would you like to know yours? Daniel didn't answer the prompt. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then slowly retreated. The apartment felt smaller now, the air thicker. He pushed his chair back and stood, pacing a slow circle around the room. The glow of the monitor stayed on his back like a spotlight. He crossed the room, grabbed the power cord, and yanked it from the wall. The CRT went black instantly. Only the radiator's faint hum remained. He told himself not to think about it. It was just a prank, a leftover program buried on a failing drive. A coincidence. The prediction about Stephen was nothing more than a lucky guess. If lucky could even describe something like that. But the thought festered. The next day at work, Stephen was at his desk as usual, leaning back in his chair, sipping from a paper cup. You look like hell, Stephen said. Didn't sleep, Daniel replied. He almost told him, but the words snagged in his throat. How could he even phrase it? Hey, my computer says you're going to die in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, on the night of August 15th, Daniel found himself pacing his apartment again. Rain pressed against the glass in cold sheets. At 8:30 p.m., he poured himself coffee he didn't want. At 9:04, his phone rang an unfamiliar number. Are you a friend of Stephen Morris? The voice was calm, official. Yes, Daniel said, already knowing what was next. There's been an accident. Interstate 90. I'm sorry. The words blurred. Daniel sat down heavily in the dark, the phone slipping from his hand onto the couch. The radiator ticked once, then again. 2 days later, he turned the CRT back on. He told himself it was just to check email. But when the screen flickered to life, the black terminal was already there, open, waiting. There was no connecting. This time, it skipped the introduction entirely. Name, Daniel Thomas Hayes. Address: 2145 W. Belmont Avenue, Chicago. Ill date of birth: the 6th of November, 1975. Prediction: death: the 4th of September, 2003. 11:42 p.m. to cause: undetermined. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. September 4th, 48 hours. He typed into the window. Stopped the cursor, blinked twice. No response. Delete nothing. Why the reply came instantly. Incorrect query. Daniel shoved away from the desk, nearly tipping the chair. He pulled the drive from the dock and carried it into the kitchen. A hammer from the drawer. One blow, then another, and another, and another, and another, bending, platters warping. He dumped the remains into the trash and stood there, breathing hard. When he stepped back into the living room, the CRT was still on. The terminal was still there. The same prediction stared back at him. He unplugged the monitor entirely. Minutes later, light spilled from the bedroom. His old backup laptop sat open, screen glowing, the same black window staring at him. The countdown had already begun. 47 hours, 51 minutes, and 8 seconds. The file wasn't tied to the drive. The next day, he tried everything, wiping the system, swapping hard drives, booting from a machine fresh out of the box. It didn't matter. The black terminal appeared on every screen he touched. By the evening of September 4th, Daniel had stopped trying. The countdown read less than an hour. He sat in his chair, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the numbers. At 11:41 p.m., the timer reached its final minute. His apartment was silent except for his breathing. The numbers fell away, second by second. 3, 2, 1. The screen went black. Transfer initiated. Transfer initiated. The words hung on the black screen for several seconds, steady and unblinking. Then, slowly, a progress bar appeared beneath them. 0%, 1%, 2%. Daniel's breath quickened. His palms were slick. He had no idea what was being transferred to where, but every instinct screamed that once it reached 100%, something irreversible would happen. He yanked the monitor's power cord again. The screen went dark. He exhaled sharply, his heartbeat a drum in his ears. Then, from the kitchen, a sound. The faint whir of his microwave's digital display turning on by itself. He turned. The small green numbers were gone, replaced by the same black screen, tiny, compressed, but unmistakable. Transfer. 3%. Daniel backed away, grabbing his coat from the chair. He bolted for the door. But the instant his hand touched the knob, the hallway light flickered and went out. Somewhere in the darkness, every device in his apartment, the television, the old laptop, even the digital clock on his oven glowed with the same terminal window. Transfer. 6%. He stumbled down the stairwell, into the street, rain slapping his face in cold sheets. He didn't stop until he was 3 blocks away, standing under a flickering street lamp. His phone, still in his pocket, vibrated. He pulled it out. The screen was black, except for 2 words. Transfer. 12%. He dropped it into the gutter. The water carried it away. For a moment, he felt almost relieved till a payphone across the street began to ring. He didn't want to answer. He didn't want to know. but his feet moved on their own. The receiver was cold against his ear. No dial tone, just silence, and then transfer, 19%. A voice, faint and mechanical, spoke his name. Not just his name, his full name, his address, his date of birth. And then it began to recite things he had never told anyone. Things no one could know. He slammed the receiver down and ran. By the time he reached the river, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The city seemed to hold its breath. Daniel stood on the bank, chest heaving, eyes scanning the shadows for any glow of that cursed window. He almost missed his own reflection in the water, except it wasn't matching his movements. Its mouth was moving on its own, forming words he couldn't hear. Transfer. 64%. His knees buckled. He shut his eyes. When he opened them, he was back in his apartment. The CRT was on. Transfer. 99%. The progress bar filled to the end. The screen flashed white, then returned to black. Transfer complete. No prediction this time. No name. Just a final line, pulsing softly in the dark. Next target, selected FCP archive, closing note. File FCP-001 has been secured within containment server Theta-9. The physical whereabouts of subject Hayes remain unknown. Black Terminal continues to manifest on isolated devices without a network connection. Investigation into its transfer protocol is ongoing. If you ever find a file named Black_Terminal.exe, would you open it?